Even though 1 in 4 Americans have a disability, we don't see 1 in 4 characters on screen having a disability.
And the stories that we often are told in Hollywood are told through a non-disabled lens. So you're always getting the same stories.
You've got sort of the tragic cripple who's isolated, alone from society. On the other hand, you've got sort of the heroic cripple that's overcoming obstacles.
I want to see more actors with disabilities playing roles that are not focused around their disability. So why don't we see more of that on the big screen? Black and white films, the classics, the old films from the past really have such a special place for me. As a young girl, there was such a lack of accessibility with movies with captioning out there. So my father, who would borrow movies from the university that he worked at, and most of those were silent films. As a little girl, I was really immersed in movies by Charlie Chaplin that he made. His characters were so expressive and so similar to my experience interacting with deaf people in real life.
Prior to the advent of sound in motion pictures, there are a number of disabled people who had careers in the industry because sound was not a barrier to them having that career. There were people like Granville Redmond, who starred in at least 6 of Charlie Chaplin's movies.
He was a deaf man, and he was an artist, and also an actor. They developed this relationship, and Charlie actually looked to him in his movements and his physicality.
So when sound came along, it opened up new vistas for storytelling, but it also closed doors for disabled deaf actors.
And for years after that, deaf people were marginalized from that space.
Belinda, how do you say hello to a friend?
There are a number of disabled tropes. One that I always point out, especially when it comes to women with disabilities, is something that I call pretty disabilities. Jane Wyman's performance in Johnny Belinda, it implies this fact that if you do not aesthetically look like you can pass for able-bodied, that you are not pretty, that you are not worth having a relationship.
That film really drove the trope of the poor, broken, deaf person, a person with a disability that really just makes people, grateful for what they actually have.
Disability is much more nuanced, much more rich, much more complicated at times than it has been depicted, shown, or known to be.
The reason that so many depictions of disability are so sad and so inspirational is because they're being told by non-disabled people because they can't see the humanity. A lot of people feel like if it's funny and we're talking about disability, we're making fun of disability. They don't get that disabled people, like anyone else, have a sense of humor, find themselves in wacky situations, can laugh at absurdity.
El Cochecito is probably my favorite disability-themed movie of all time because it was decades ahead of where the culture was. The film does so much unique, both for 1960 and even for 2023. Probably the most radical reframing that you see is the positioning of the wheelchair, not as something that imprisons a person, but rather as a chariot of independence.
¿Te gusta? Estupendo, 100 mejor que el suyo, don Luca. Claro.
This dude literally wanted to be disabled. Like, that was goals for him, to have a wheelchair, to be one of us. They had their own little community, and it seemed like a lot of fun. It was like a Golden Girls of disabled people built into this Spanish film. I love the idea of disability being something that's desired.
Disability had always been presented and projected as an individual burden. Something that an individual character had to overcome. there was a shift, and that was reflective of changes in society. Disabled people are learning from the Black civil rights movement and saying, wait a minute, we're not content to stick with second-class status. They changed public policy, and they couldn't help but filter down to the stories that were being told and the movies that people were watching.
You know, Mr. Martin, you get more from Uncle for your disability than me and my old lady get put together.
Coming Home is one of the great disabled movies because for me as a wheelchair user, it really captures a lot of the little nuances that people with wheelchairs experience. There's a scene in the film where Jon Voight goes into a grocery store. It's this very small, minor scene that has really no bearing on the rest of the plot. But for me as a wheelchair user who's been in that situation, that screenwriter understood it.
I'm not a very nice person.
Jon Voight's character is a regular guy, which means he is a sexual being. He is allowed to have desires and also be desired by Jane Fonda's character in the movie.
At least his character answered the age-old question, can a paraplegic have sex? Which is yes. And I really loved that Coming Home showed both invisible and visible disabilities.
For most people, it's not about fighting the disability. It's about fighting those obstacles that exist within society that make it more difficult for us to navigate a world that wasn't built with us in mind.
Everybody ready?
You see it reflected in films like Inside Moves. They're laughing, they're cutting up, they're giving each other a little bit of grief, and they're really showing that bond that comes through shared experience. It was a change away from disability being thought of as an individual burden to something that was a collective experience, a shared responsibility.
I'm going to work hard, but I'm going to do it my way.
It's important to look back in history and think about how people saw disability and what we need to continue to work on. A lot of early representation of the disabled community made me feel embarrassed. I feel like now I'm hopeful that we are paying attention more to how do we actually connect with characters that live different lives than us. The more we see others, the more we can see ourselves. Sometimes you might see it as a difference, but if you're familiar with it, you want to learn more about it.
Disabled people can and should be everywhere, even in ways that you maybe haven't imagined before.
I want more disabled people behind the camera and on screen. Let's have disabled writers, makeup artists, and crew, but especially disabled producers. The people who greenlight films need to be people invested in telling disability stories.
They can be romances, they can be comedies, they can be musicals. Why not a kung fu movie?
You don't need to make it about disability. It can just be a really great story, a really great rom-com, a really great drama, and it just has disabled characters in it. That's the next frontier.